Well, hello and welcome. If you're new here, this is Mostly Mets. I'm Jimmy Mack, and today what I'd like to speak about is the big news in the Mets world, and that is that Antoan Richardson, the first base coach, will not be returning for the 2026 season. He's the only coach that the Mets did ask back for the 2026 season after the collapse of last year, and he basically decided that he does not want to be a part of this coaching staff. Now, I probably had a lot of the same reactions that a lot of you guys did. After hearing the news yesterday, I was thinking, what are the Mets doing? Why are they so incompetent? Why cannot they not keep this guy after he had such a great season? The Mets were about 90% successful in stolen bases last year. He turned Juan Soto into almost a 40-40 player. And I couldn't understand why they wouldn't bring this guy back. Could it be about money? Could it be about position? I didn't know. But then I took a breath. And I came to realize that honestly, Richardson probably just didn't want to be part of this coaching staff. Not because he doesn't like the Mets organization or because he doesn't like the players or doesn't get along with people, doesn't like Carlos Mendoza, but because he wants a little bit of security. And maybe he wants a better position. Maybe he wanted that bench coach spot that the Mets gave to Kai Correa. Maybe he was a little offended that they gave it to a guy from outside of the organization instead of giving it to a guy who had such a successful season last year. Maybe he just realizes that Carlos Mendoza is a lame duck manager. He's only got 1 year left on his deal. If the Mets are 10 games under in June, Carlos Mendoza is going to be fired. Maybe he doesn't want to hitch his wagon to that. Maybe he wants to go somewhere where he has a little job security. Maybe he gets a 3-year contract to work with a new manager who's maybe just getting hired, or maybe an existing guy that he's worked with before, that he's friends with, that he feels comfortable with. And then we got a tweet from Andy Martino a couple of hours or maybe an hour or so after the original news came out. And that is, he basically said the Mets did everything that they could to try to re-sign him. But it turns out it ended because he kind of realized that he just wanted to become a free agent and that this will all become more clear in early November. Now, what that means to me, that it will all become clear in early November, is he's already kind of got a job lined up. He's already spoken to someone. He's already got his eye on something. Someone's already called him and said, hey, your contract's going to expire. I'd like to add you to my coaching staff if you're not going to stay there. And he would like to go take that opportunity. Maybe it's a bench coach. Maybe it's just a first base coach for a manager that he's worked with before that he likes, and maybe a new guy who's going to have some security behind him. You know, he might just want to stay somewhere for a while. Maybe he wants to be a manager himself, and he doesn't see hitching himself to Carlos Mendoza being that option. I don't know. But what I will say, and I did have that initial, what are the Mets doing? Why are they doing this? But the crash out that's been happening from Mets fans over Antoan Richardson leaving the organization is kind of just crazy to me. At the end of the day, he had a great season, and he's a very highly sought-after guy now. He's going to easily get a job somewhere else. He's going to be considered maybe the best first base coach available. But he's a first base coach. And when you look at the history, like, do we even remember who the last first base coach was, or the guy before that? What about 10 years ago? Do you remember who the first base coaches were? Now, this guy might be different. Maybe he is better than them. Maybe he did something that they couldn't do. And he did. But are the Mets going to succeed or fail based off of who their first base coach is? I really don't think so. And you see people saying, what's wrong with David Stearns? He's cheap. He's not giving him the money that he wants. I don't think this had anything to do with money. I think it has to do with maybe a different type of job that he wanted, or job security. I don't think it had anything to do with money. So the people blaming David Stearns, I mean, if you want to listen to Andy Martino, who, listen, he has a spotty history. He obviously sometimes comes off as a Met hater, but he is around the team and he does have sources. And I would assume that after the Mets fan crash out, maybe someone from the Mets called him and said, hey, we did everything we could to re-sign him. He just didn't want to be here. Could he have gotten that information directly from a Mets source? Absolutely, because why wouldn't they say that? If the fans are freaking out saying, why isn't David Stearns doing his job? Why isn't he bringing him back? It then makes sense for someone to say, hey, look, we did whatever we could. We tried to sign him. We wanted to bring him back. We did everything we could. He just wanted to leave. And I think that's important to remember. It takes two to tango. The Mets could offer him whatever they want. If he just wants to go somewhere else, he's just going to go somewhere else. So I think the crash out is a little bit, unwarranted for a first base coach, no matter how good he is. I mean, you look at over on the World Series right now, the Dodgers and the Blue Jays, the average baseball fan has no idea who the first base coach is for the Blue Jays and the Dodgers. What I would be more concerned about is trying to match their rosters, trying to put together a roster of players who can compete with the top teams. And right now they don't have that. They don't have pitching. They need a couple more bats. They need a whole new bullpen. So right now I think it's way more important to be looking ahead at who they can get in free agency and through trades than worrying about who's going to be the first base coach. I just don't think it really matters all that much. Also, on the other side of that, it's not like Antoan Richardson has this proprietary system that he developed and hid as a secret and doesn't tell other people how it works. The players are going to remember what he told them. And maybe they're going to impart some of that knowledge to the first base coach. Do we know that it was all Antoan Richardson? Could it have come from the analytics department and they worked together? And they figured out through watching video that when a pitcher does this, that's when you go. And maybe it was all figured out through the organization. Maybe it wasn't Antoan Richardson. Now, I still obviously give him credit for it. His name was attached to it. He's still a huge part of that. And maybe you can't replicate it with another first base coach or base running coach. But that has to be at least part of the thought process going forward. I'm sure they know what he was doing, and maybe they can try to replicate it with someone else the best they can. Maybe the players are going to remember. You hear players all the time, they're interviewed and they say, how did you learn how to do this? Or how did you learn how to do that? Well, I had a first base coach in AA who had this little technique or thing, and I've just used it throughout my whole career. The players will remember. And maybe it won't be as emphasized, maybe it won't be something that they work on every day, but it's not proprietary. He's not the only one with that information. Other people, I'm sure, in the Mets organization have that process as well. Now, obviously, it's a first base coach. We're not going to spend a whole half hour or an hour video talking about it. Just wanted to put my 2 cents in, where I could here. But that's really all I have today. Obviously, listen, this might even be a little bit amplified because the day before you heard about Druschel leaving the Mets after one season to go back to the Yankees, the assistant pitching coach. And what I'd say to that is that was always going to happen. He was a Hefner guy. Hefner brought him to the Mets. Now, obviously, the organization did too because they had to pay him and hire him, but he was a Hefner guy. So once Hefner left, he was always leaving. He wasn't going to stick around. Maybe you hadn't heard anything because maybe the Mets were interviewing him for the pitching coach job. Maybe he was in the running for that, and then once they told him, hey, we're going to go a different direction, then he decided to look elsewhere. That's very possible. So I don't get too wrapped up in who the assistant pitching coach is, especially because when they hire a new pitching coach, he's going to want his own guys anyway. So I'm not worried about Druschel or Antoan Richardson, even though I think Richardson will be a loss, but we're not going to remember it in 2 years. If the Mets go out and make the playoffs this year, we're not going to be saying, we're not going to remember Antoan Richardson. If the Mets go out there and don't make the playoffs this year, we're not going to say it's because they didn't re-sign Antoan Richardson. The Mets aren't going to win and lose because of who their first base coach is. Now, if you're new here and you end up liking this content, please subscribe, give me a like, comment what you think. Do you think this is a bigger deal than I'm making it out to be? Do you think I'm just being crazy and this is a huge thing? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if you agree with me. Let me know if you don't really care who the first base coach is, or I shouldn't say that. Listen, I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. I'm saying in the grand scheme of what's going to happen moving forward, this is a speed bump. It's not a roadblock. So don't get too wrapped up in it. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And that's really all I got. So until next time, let's go Mets.